In today's video, I am going to be breaking down Fanbo Zeng and his basketball shooting form because he's going to be in this year's NBA All-Star game for the Rising Stars Challenge. So let's get down, let's check out his shooting form because it's actually really good. I hope that you enjoy. So there isn't exactly a ton of footage out there for Fanbo Zeng shooting, however, we can take a lot from this video. Number one is, of course, we want to really look at his feet. We want to see where his feet line up, and of course what we can see is something that's very, very interesting, and that is that his feet are tilted away from the basket, and same as his hips as well as his shoulders. This is all very important. You want to have at least 3 out of the 4 things on your body, including your knees, all lined up. His knees, however, are together. They do come together, which for some older school trainers will say that there could be potential knee injuries by doing this, but that's not something I'm going to explain here or even agree with here. He also has his right knee somewhat facing towards the rim, while his left knee is, of course, in line with the rest of his body. Kind of an interesting form factor here. When he raises the ball up into his set point, we can see that his arm is bent the exact same angle as it is when he raises it up into his set point. Now he has what seems to be a 2-motion shot. He does freeze for about maybe a millisecond, about 2 to 3 frames. However, I would actually suggest, or at least say, that he is a 1-motion shooter because it doesn't exactly pause for long enough to be considered a 2-motion shot in my opinion. We can also see here that there is a very small gap between his palm and the ball. That's actually something that is natural, that will occur. However, we can see that the sides of his palm are touching the ball, and this is something that a lot of coaches may say that you shouldn't do. But in reality, we want our shooting hand to be as soft as possible. We don't want to be over gripping that ball, and that is how you can do that. From there, we can see that his offhand is, of course, on the exact side of the ball, facing his left side. He's a left-handed shooter, and he has 0 thumb flick. That is very important. He also releases what looks to be a split finger release between his pointer and middle finger. It's kind of blurry, but that is basically what he does release with. One thing I will say though is he has a lot less tilt than many other left-handed shooters. Many left-handed shooters will have a massive tilt because they try to get their shoulder and elbow in line with the rim. So the very little bit of tilt that he has is actually very interesting to myself. He can get pretty close to square to the basket, which is something that you don't see a lot of with left-handed players. His set point is right above his left eye, and that's actually a nice set point because it's nice and high. It's going to be very hard to block. We can actually see really well from this angle that he's using mostly his right eye to be able to see the rim. His left arm is actually pretty well in front of his left eye. However, when he does rise up into his release, and we can see here that he does have a split finger release, that of course just before he releases, we can see that that shoulder is really perfectly in line with his elbow, and that at least a quarter to half of that basketball is over top of that shoulder, which will allow him to have that straight shot. This is extremely important. You don't want to have the ball way over here. You also don't want to have the ball way over here. You want it to be somewhere over top of that shoulder so that you can have that shot in line. He also, as we can see, has a very soft release, which means that his hand curves quite a bit. That is a lot different than a Michael Jordan release where it's his wrist only that bends and not his hand. That soft release will give him extra arc, but will and could take away from his backwards rotation on that shot. And then from this angle, we can see that he doesn't have a 90-degree angle on his arm. There's so many older school trainers that say you need to have 90 degrees on your shoulder and a 90 degrees on your elbow, and then also a 90 degrees on your wrist, so that basically they call it 90-90-90, and that doesn't always work for most players, or for many players. We actually have figured out as new age trainers that that is not always the case. Here we can actually see that his wrist is actually not bent that much at all. And you don't necessarily have to if you've cut the kind of soft release that he has. I really like his shooting form. So when he goes up for his set point, we actually see that he's got basically just over 90-degree angle on his shoulder and kind of close to 90-degree on his elbow. It's definitely not 90 degrees, and that wrist is pretty well in line, pretty close anyways, to in line with his upper arm. His hand is, of course, nicely wide open, and of course, same as his shooting hand for when he shoots. We can see that right here where his hand is very well and wide spread open. This is very important. You want your hand to take up as much of that ball as possible because it gives you a more stable, consistent shot. That is Fanbo Zeng's shooting form. He is a very good shooter, and he is, of course, being compared to Yao Ming, which just doesn't make sense to me whatsoever because he's nowhere close to the same height as Yao Ming and a massively different style game. But overall, Fanbo Zeng is going to be a very good player, I believe, at the NBA level in the future. He's going to be in this year's NBA draft, and I kind of hope that the Raptors draft him. Between him and Jovic, one of those two players I hope they draft, but I believe that Fanbo Zeng is going to be a ridiculously good basketball player in the future. He's got height, size, drive, handles, and of course, shooting on his side. Anyways, I hope that you've enjoyed today's video. If you have, hit that like button, subscribe, and I'll see you guys again next time.